you talk about accountability in the design of this moving forward to those specific things. My last question is specifically for Focus, and it is an extension of this question that I just asked. So in this principles of partnership slide, the first one is to embody the application of the racial equity lens. If you were to apply the racial equity lens to Focus's work right now, what would be your assessment of what you would have to shift or evolve or change in order to meet the standard that Nicole just discussed? And I'm assuming that you've done some of this thinking, given that your organizational principles shifted. And so I'm wondering, as a result of that, what can we expect will change?
Well, that's a good question. As we outlined before in our presentation, what we did is we made a decision to put our best foot forward in terms of applying for this, is we looked for alignment. And the alignment that we looked for were along those qualities or those principles of partnership. And we felt that there were things that we knew that we met, and there was areas of opportunity for us to grow. As I mentioned before, as we embarked on our strategic plan, we looked inward. And one of the decisions that we made related to our values, for example, is just in using the term diversity and inclusion. We felt that equity was much more of a term that was forward-looking, and in light of the challenges of our community and the work that needs to be done, that's an area that we can focus on. Mm-hmm. And so an initial step is in looking at even our curriculum in terms of how are we applying that lens across the board. And additionally, that's something that trickles down to even the training that we do. So we have 7 leadership programs across the board, about to become 8. Those are things that we're being intentional about in our training of applying that lens across the breadth of our programming.
Thanks.
Any other questions from commissioners or community?
Yeah, champions of change. We got a lot of public officials, we got a lot of corporate leaders, and we need champions of change. We need people who sign on the dotted line that they're going to support the work of the Ferguson Commission and Focus to make this happen. And at Reverend Wilson's church a couple of weeks ago, Tom Irwin and the guy from the regional business,
Joe
Reagan from the regional chamber were there. And they said that they would support financing the 25-year financing
the
racial equity fund. So I think, as part of this process, you need some high-level people to step out and say, I signed up. I'm sincere about this. I believe in the racial equity framework. And that includes political leaders, too. So I think that, public means something. So I think, if we have people who you believe that will do that, ask them to sign on the dotted line. And that will make a difference in terms of the PR of the whole effort in the future.
Okay. We'll take 2 more and then we'll go into design conversation.
Just a practical question. We learned tonight that the research partnership dropped out of the Focus presentation. When you say that Focus would be the fiscal agent, does that also mean the St. Louis Community Foundation dropped out?
As it is right now, because we've been asked to consider being the fiscal agent, it's similar to the work that we've done when we worked on the HUD project. So it's not necessarily a new area for us. It's something that we're under consideration, serious consideration in moving this forward. I don't want to say that in the affirmative because this is something that is we're still exploring how this is going to play out.
Co-Chair McClure.
So just continuing just a little bit more clarity on the fiscal agent role. So the United Way has been the fiscal agent for the commission. The commission's been an independent body and made the decisions with regard to the expenditure of the funds allotted to us. would you see that, and this would be, I suppose, to Nicole or Bethany, would you see that Forward Through Ferguson, as an independent entity, would have a similar kind of relationship with the fiscal agent, if it's Focus or whoever it is, that much like the commissions have with the United Way?
So a little bit of background, we were able, when we met with Focus leadership, to actually ask explicitly that representative from United Way, Rosie Stafford, would join us to really share the background work of tactically what it is that what role that they played. It was a 3-page document that shared what kind of fiscal agent that you need for government funds, private funds, and other. In the conversation, we could tell that Focus leadership was used to being fiscal agent and took down copious notes to say it didn't seem to be problematic to explore what that would mean. Second thing we also did is that there's another opportunity to leverage the structure or infrastructure that is provided through the Ready by 21 efforts, which the United Way shared those documents as well for consideration. So Yami, if you can speak to anything that you're thinking internally that might help to answer the question about fiscal agency. From my perspective, it felt very strong that that was a viable possibility.
So as I mentioned before, Focus St. Louis a couple of years ago worked on a HUD grant, and we had a lot of community collaborators that we worked on this grant with. And so part of our responsibility was just in the oversight and grants administration. So it's not completely unfamiliar territory with Focus in terms of what that entails. And so at the meeting that we had recently with getting a better understanding of what the Ready by 21 structure was and how United Way has served as a fiscal agent for the commission, it doesn't seem like something that's completely out of the realm of possibility. And so as we continue the conversation, it's in outlining what specifically is that going to look like moving forward. So right now, using the model that we had used before for the HUD project, we actually have a accountant that we subcontract with. And so similar to the HUD project, that consultant has helped us manage all of what went along with the grants administration for that particular one. And so that would be something that we would explore in detail as we flesh this out even further.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Any other from community? Maybe one more burning question? Seeing none, then we'll enter into a period of design conversation among commissioners. We'll have some guidance, I would imagine, from staff, but I think more than anything else, we are seeking to respond to what's been presented to us to suggest now going from kind of interrogatory or questioning kind of what's happened, having some clarification, getting a little more declarative about changes that we would like to see in the design of this particular structure of partnership. So is there any input on changes that you would like to see for the sake of design to share with staff of Focus and the commission team to go back as we kind of structure this?
You guys are both looking at me. This isn't
Commissioner
necessarily a change, but just a suggestion. And I understand that the design is still being undertaken, so for consideration as you guys do it. I think these principles of partnership are really strong. I would suggest that, I don't know if it would be the Leadership Council of Forward Through Ferguson or some other diverse body that would be a part of assessing the amount to which partners are achieving these things, right? Offering suggestions to partners and offering support as they move toward those suggestions, I think could add to this a formal accountability that you were talking about, but also engage in, leverage rather, the diverse voices that will be at the table through that process, that I trust and believe, given where this has evolved, will greatly include youth and grassroots leadership.
It's a similar comment. I actually want to pick up on 2 points. First, from a design standpoint, I think from a governance perspective, if there is no governance for the partnership, then the governance of Focus St. Louis becomes the default governing body of forward through Ferguson. My suggestion here is that whatever design include an articulated leadership council very specifically for the partnership that is not the governance of focus, but rather is in conversation with both parties. It has responsibility for oversight of the MOU to make sure that parties on both sides are actually caring for their commitments in the MOU. Finally, I would also suggest, while we speak to the potential relationship with FSG and Policy Link here, rather, and I think on the post-January 1 includes, we say potentially, we reference several times things we could get out of the partnership. I would suggest strengthening the language to say that post-January 1, we actually speak to executing an agreement with FSG and Policy Link for staff and volunteer training, ongoing coaching, and external assessment. Those three critical functions being a part of an executed agreement that is a part of the overall partnership understanding as well.
I might build on that comment just a bit. I think one of the things that the Commission knows, and perhaps many in the audience know, is that we have benefited during this journey and during this work from lots of national advice that folks that have had learnings. You all remember Robert Wood Johnson came and spoke to us about the New Orleans experience, and it was from that notion that the longitudinal and long-term nature of what we're doing came to have some flesh and some meaning. Others perhaps a bit more behind the scenes and not in public testimony, but nonetheless giving us their learning. And one encouraging dynamic to me is that FSG and Policy Link have been very willing to step to this table and help us. And so to put some more formal structure around that, particularly in the early formation time of the Forward through Ferguson work and the movement of more partners to the table, helping folks understand how they might improve what they do as a partner, I think will give the Leadership Council and the team at Forward through Ferguson a really robust national model, because as they have said, this is new. We're doing it differently than others have done it, but our community requires this to be done differently. The Commission has been a different approach, and so I think it's really a continuation of what we've done to leverage national knowledge into our particular circumstance.
We note that we do have Commissioner Blackman with us via technology, so I just ask staff maybe it's not now, but it may be an opportunity at some point to engage her. So maybe if we have the capacity to shoot her a note for when she may want to have comment or input. That was my way of saying don't put her immediately on the screen.
Yeah, that's right.
But
It's too late.
I know.
Tried to.
Excuse me, Co-Chair Wilson, can I ask a question?
Yes,
Clarifying
Commissioner.
question. For the Leadership Council, did I understand you to say that you would appreciate in the advanced design specifically delineated eligibility or requirements for participation in that body, as well as governance that lays out what the roles and responsibilities of that council would be?
I think both of those are appropriate. At this point, I just want clarification that there will be one, because in our questioning, it seemed that there wasn't commitment that there would be one, that there could be, but that it wasn't necessarily so. So I just wanted clarity that there will be a body, a leadership body, and that, yeah. So that's what I was saying.
Okay. And you were differentiating between a governing body of the entity and a governing body of the partnership, correct?
Yes, because quite frankly, I don't see that there is no other entity legally, but there is a partnership here, right?
Starsky?
Yes,
I
Commissioner
have a
Nagler.
question. I was wondering if there would be a consideration of a name change of Forward through Ferguson. Ferguson is a community of 21,000, of a very diverse community that is, quite frankly, going through its own healing process. And it's gone through a great deal in this past year, and they're trying to move forward. Well, I think the Forward through Ferguson can have positive connotations. It's just a constant reminder that we won't forget, but there is economic issues, and there are a variety of other issues that the city of Ferguson is dealing with.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'll just offer a comment, Scott, so thank you for the candor and the thought and the concern behind your comment. And we thought long and hard, as you know, even before titling the report, Forward Through Ferguson, about that. And as you know, from the very beginning, we have clearly said this is about our region, and this is about what's happening in our entire region. And some of that was frustrating to some of the leadership in Ferguson who wanted us to focus more on things specific to that community. So we've kind of heard that in different dynamics. And thoughtfully, and this was not a decision taken lightly, and we talked a lot with our staff team and others that were thinking through the process of communication and messaging. The Ferguson name has become to me more than Ferguson, of course, and more than the community. And I understand your statement. It's a reminder of what occurred there. But it has become a national, if not international, symbol of much broader issues. And
that's my point.
Yeah, I understand. And as much as, if from a Ferguson perspective individually, you may not want that to be, it is. And it is kind of the reality. And so my own thought personally, and I think the reason which we proceeded down this line, and the reason I would support continuing to keep that branding, is it does have, we're moving through these issues, and we're moving through the issues raised by what happened in the events surrounding Ferguson, and that is something I think we need to embrace in order to move forward. So I understand you may disagree with that, and I certainly understand the rationale behind that, but I think nonetheless it is kind of where we are and something we need to own.
I'll just ask you to reconsider.
Understand.
I would agree with Commissioner Negwar about the name of Ferguson. We can use the name Ferguson to market activities that we're doing. But Ferguson is a community of 21,000 people, of businesses that are trying to move forward. I deal internationally with lots of individuals, and the name Ferguson has a negative connotation. We have the opportunity, by changing the name, to signify that we're dealing with the St. Louis region as a whole, not that we're dealing with a small municipality. Ferguson needs healing. Ferguson needs growth. Ferguson needs support. I believe it's ill-advised. I believe it's inappropriate for us to use the name Forward Through Ferguson. We can find an alternative name which is more appropriate, which is positive, and which does not utilize the events in Ferguson as a marketing mechanism for what we do. I feel very strongly, and I would so move.
You say, I want to clarify how you close. Did you say I so move?
I so move that we find a different name other than Forward Through Ferguson.
And when you say that, you mean a different name for what?
A different name for the entity, whatever it is. I don't know what this entity is.
Okay.
Whether it's a 501c3 or a 501c4 or a private corporation or whatever it is, but we've been distributed with a listing of a column of Forward Through Ferguson. I don't know what that is. I believe it's inappropriate to use the name Ferguson, and I really agree with what Commissioner Negwar has said. We should find a different name other than Ferguson. We can use St. Louis, we can use, Forward Through the region, but I believe with the creativity that we have, we can find a positive name that we can use.
So we do have a motion on the floor. My question is, do we have a second?
I will second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second that we, as far as the discussion regarding the name for the successor partnership and/or entity, that we find a different name other than Ferguson or some construction of a name that does not include Ferguson. I want to check in just for the sake of accountability. This seems to be, it seems not to be a design conversation element. It does not seem to be critical to the core of the succession. So I just want to check in about accountability for the recusals because this does not seem to be a germane issue for myself and for Commissioner Pulliam.
using the power of the co-chair, I'll make a judgment that the recusal would not apply to this particular vote, but would welcome the commission to vote on that. If anyone wishes to challenge that ruling of the chair, you are welcome to do so. But because this does not relate to the question of the focus partnership, but does relate to the question of ongoing design and structure, that Felicia and Starsky would vote on this. So if there's any challenge, someone make a motion to rule otherwise. Okay, hearing none then.
That being the case, and recognizing that we do have, I want to make sure we just kind of communicating back and forth with Reverend Blackman. I want to make sure she has capacity to follow the conversations. I'm noting that she has some broken elements here, so we may misvote here, so maybe it's best to go roll call vote here, just to note who we have the opportunity to capture and who we don't. So I ask for the assistance of our managing director here. So the motion on the floor that's been moved by Commissioner Carr, seconded by Commissioner Negwer, is that the commission, in consideration of a successor entity and partnership to implement the commission's work, find a different name other than Forward Through Ferguson for the branding of such initiative.
Okay, taking a roll call vote.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Is there further discussion? Sorry. Commissioner Sly. Oh. Commissioner James Haddon. He's just being a good commissioner. There you go.
Actually, Rasheen really grabbed the mic.
It's going to make his way back all the way to you, Rich.
Actually, my thing was I want to hear the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm empathetic to both sides of this story, so I do want to hear the discussion. I've heard part of it from the co-chair about why it's important, and I certainly hear from our other two commissioners. I'm curious about, is it bigger than this? And are there other opportunities? So I'm going to turn it over. I just wanted the discussion.
Do I get to go first?
If I could follow up on what Becky was saying.
Okay. Commissioner Aldridge, then Commissioner Gore.
Thank you. I don't agree too many times with, or throughout this process with TR, but I kind of want to on one point. I also don't really understand what this Forward Through Ferguson is. Is it the Ferguson Commission staff? Is it going to be some of us? Is it going to be a more unflinching arm of two bodies, and Focus is going to be more of a program type of way and using maybe some unflinching ways through their program? I'm not really sure what the unflinching, or if it's going to be two things or one thing. But I disagree with my fellow commissioners. I don't think that Forward Through Ferguson, changing the name or keeping the name is a bad thing that we need to get rid of. I think as we look back at this last year, of course, when you hear Ferguson, one thing comes to mind: Mike Brown. Of course, when you think of Ferguson, you think police brutality. But in reality, as we've been saying for a long time, it is deeper than Ferguson. It is deeper than just St. Louis, and it is deeper than just police brutality. And that's why we as a commission all kind of understood that, even though it happened in Ferguson, it is deeper than that. That we were going to continue to push forward and going to continue to work on issues outside of just police brutality. But like my friend said next to me, it's kind of hard to say let's take away or let's get rid of the Ferguson part. I mean, what happened. We can't not say what happened in Ferguson happened, and I don't think any of us on this commission or even the commission itself has painted what happened in Ferguson as a negative light. And like he said, it's like taking away Selma. You know, Selma is Selma, and you just, I mean, it is what it is, and it is nothing negative to it. It is history, and we have to own it, and we got to move forward. We got to figure out ways that we are going to make it positive. And if you look at what it says, Forward Through Ferguson is not painted in a negative light. The people in Ferguson have been going through a lot this last year, but that's why we are here to try to help them, not just try to help Ferguson, but to help the whole region, help communities like Ferguson that have been left out. So Forward Through Ferguson, also Forward Through Dalewood, Forward Through Bellefontaine, Forward Through Jennings, but unfortunately we can't say Forward Through the whole St. Louis County, because we all know all the municipalities are really jacked up and we need to change them. But we got one right here that people are trying to paint something positive out of it. We see that a negative situation did happen in Ferguson, but folks are not going to continue to let that darkness be a dark. We're trying to make some positive. We're trying to shine a light. We're trying to move forward through Ferguson. So I would hope that my other fellow commissioners vote no on this, and we continue to use what we've been using since we released the report. I mean, our report booklet is Forward Through Ferguson. So, I mean, if we change the name now, it's not like, you know, our report is not still called Forward Through Ferguson.
I was going to make a comment, but I agree with everything Rasheen just said.
Okay. Commissioner Gore.
So I was going to just make just, to me, it's a process point. I think valid issues have been raised on both sides. This wasn't something that was on the agenda for this evening. I haven't given it much thought because it's an issue that just came up for me. I mean, we've talked previously about the fact that we were called the Ferguson Commission but had a broader mandate than that, and that's something we talked about previously. To me, this issue should be the first order of business for this organization. Whenever it's established and a structure is set up, they should take this issue up and decide what they want to name themselves. And that we as a commission shouldn't really, we don't need to get involved in that, and it doesn't need to be decided tonight. That's my view of it. I think it's something that's worthy of a further discussion than being put on the agenda at the last second and discussed right now.
Do you offer that as an amendment?
I offer that as a explanation as to why I'm going to vote no on the motion.
Okay.
But that I do think that it's something that is worthy of further discussion and consideration than it's going to probably get tonight.
Got it. Is there further discussion? Commissioner Blackman.
Hi. I'm following as best I can. Some of the conversation is broken. I understand that there is a recommendation on the table to change the name from Forward Through Ferguson to what?
There's not a recommendation as to what. The core of the recommendation is to remove Ferguson as a reference and care for the citizens of the city.
I feel that it's important that we keep in front of us what brought us to this place. We are beginning to face Ferguson. I think that the implementation of the work that the commission has done will be the forward movement, but it is important that we remember what brought us to this place. And anything that takes away from that remembrance, I believe would be harmful to this process. So I'm in favor of keeping Forward Through Ferguson because I want to see us move forward. That's about it.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Blackman. Is there any further discussion on readiness? Commissioner Packnett.
I just want to second what Commissioner Aldridge and Commissioner Blackman said. In addition, I think this is a critical opportunity to apply our racial equity lens because as someone who has been trained thoroughly and trains others in racial equity, culturally responsive leadership, et cetera, one of the important attributes of that is, to say it a plain way, is to name a thing a thing. And, you know, when we think about this word healing, it can mean all different kinds of processes for all different kinds of people. But to a comment that was made by someone in the public earlier, it's important to recognize that typically for people living in marginalized communities, it is the fact that we don't name the places of our discontent that lead to our lack of healing, right? That lead to the erasure of the things that have happened to us. And so I think it's important not to continue the practice that we so often do in St. Louis of sweeping the things we don't want to talk about under the rug, because quite frankly, that's how we got here. Instead, let's make a choice to continue to be unflinching and call a thing a thing.
Thank you. Commissioner Negler.
I just want to make it clear, that was not the intent to sweep this under the rug. This is strictly as I mentioned, a process for Ferguson. That is my position. Sure. It is for the city of Ferguson, the citizens of Ferguson.
Sure, and I am saying that this conversation about healing, again, can mean multiple things for multiple people. And so you're offering a perspective that taking the name out can mean healing for some, and I'm offering the perspective that keeping the name in means healing for some.
Correct.
Good deal.
And as I say, all politics is local.
Commissioner Pulliam.
Thank you. I live in Ferguson. I understand the pain, the agitation, the uncomfortable space, the fatigue of the connotation, the definition that saying Ferguson, the context of what Ferguson is, but that's what the work is for. If we don't have Ferguson there, in 365 days, people will forget what we're moving forward through. And that's a problem. We're moving forward through a very specific situation that has caused grief and pain and angst and economic depravity and health disparities. And that pain is what we need to keep our eyes on, because that's what this work is about. So I live there. I know it's difficult for me. It's difficult for my neighbors. But this is not easy work. These are difficult times, and we have to go forward through the difficulty.
I'd like to now just quickly offer, in this context, the capacity for redefining. We began the discussion on tonight by talking about the number of page views, 68,000 page views at Forward Through Ferguson. So perhaps that means something to people as a product of this work that is different. It means something as it relates to resolutions. It means something as it relates to innovative process that they're engaging. 26,000 times people have visited this work, and 2,100 folks have downloaded even the PDF version of the 189-page report, 196-page report. So I think there's additional value there. So I add that as my comment as part of discussion as well. But perhaps it's appropriate now, if there's no further unreadiness, to call the roll on the question.
Okay, please signify by aye or nay. Reverend Starsky Wilson.
Nay.
Rich McClure.
No.
Kevin Allbrand. Rasheen Aldridge.
No.
Pastor Tracy Blackman.
She's gone.
No, she's there.
Nay.
T.R. Carr.
Aye.
Gabe Gore.
No.
Becky James Hatter. Dan Isom.
No.
Scott Negwer.
Yes.
Brittany Packnett.
Nay.
Felicia Pulliam.
No.
Pat Sly.
No.
Byron Watson.
Nay.
Rose Miller.
No.
There are 13. 13 noes.
So at that, the commission has decided not to take action on the name of the initiative, to the point of Commissioner Gore, that does not preclude the commission has also not taken affirmative action for the future in the partnership. So, is there further discussion regarding the design of the partnership that has been placed before us? Response to the elements here, I would suggest where we are trying to find ourselves is landed at language to provide some affirmative direction around the go forward on the roadmap for Forward Through Ferguson. So if there are particular elements, well, let me ask first, staff, is there language that is to be presented to us as relates to a motion to move forward? Or are we responding to language on a motion that aligns here, or do we need to construct that?
Okay, let's look at the following as proposed language for consideration. The request from staff tonight and the presenters would be to approve the partnership and direct staff and co-chairs to negotiate and sign agreement with Focus, St. Louis, and other partners consistent with principles and responsibilities as outlined in the presentation and as outlined in the feedback and the design process.
Could you reread, please? So what staff is proposing for us to respond to is a motion to approve the partnership and direct staff and co-chairs to negotiate and sign an agreement with Focus St. Louis consistent with the principles and responsibilities aligned in the presentation.
And the subsequent feedback in the design process.
Including subsequent feedback, which we have noted in a couple of ways on the design format, the inclusion of a leadership council, the structuring for an agreement with FSG and Policy Link for staff coaching, training, and external assessment. Were there other elements of design from this conversation I think we want to make sure we get in?
I had suggested that the leadership council act in a formal way of evaluation and accountability toward the principles of partnership.
Especially noting youth and grassroots leadership.
Yes.
Any further discussion, or is there anyone who is willing to make said motion?
For purposes of getting the motion on the floor, I'll certainly make the motion as staff has presented it with the addition of the design elements as identified by the commission.
Second.
Co-Chair McClure has moved. Commissioner Backnet has seconded. We note as we go into discussion in this phase, in particular action, the recusals that were noted before are, of course, in effect for Commissioner Pulliam and myself. Is there further discussion regarding design? Commissioner Albright.
Just one question, and when we're talking about signing contracts, are we talking about this MOU, or is that MOU something that this entity is going to sign with Focus? Is the commission going to sign the MOU, or is this other entity going to sign the MOU?
The commission is not, as the commission sunsets December 31, but the commission would have, as you've had input into that. So the expectation is that an MOU will be developed and signed between the partners Forward through Ferguson, quote unquote, plus Focus St. Louis.
So I guess the only thing, I'm confused on a lot of times, but in the motion it talked about directing co-chairs to sign contracts. What would that entail?
Well, it says it directs the co-chairs to, wait a minute, to negotiate and sign. So that may be an appropriate, that may be an appropriate amendment.
Yeah, let me, and I should have caught that. So let me, here's the way I see that playing. In effect, I think between now and the 31st, we're operating as a proxy for the Leadership Council, but have no authority to act, which is not unusual from the last 12 months where we've had no authority. But at the end of the day, the Leadership Council is the one, or the governing entity, whatever that turns out to be, would be the one that would have to make that agreement and sign it. So all we're doing is providing guidance and advice to get them started with our best call at what this might look like. And they can take that or not take that. My own hope would be that the folks that transition to this are so closely aligned with, if not part of what we have done, that becomes pretty much a reflection of what we have done. But it is confusing and fuzzy, and I get that. So the amendment, to amend the motion which I made on behalf of staff, would be to say that we would develop a draft memorandum of understanding with prospective partners and leave the question of contracts out, because we have no legal authority to sign any contracts on their behalf.
That would be the amendment I offer.
Good deal.
I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
Good deal. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, and accepting that it's a friendly amendment, we'll invite again a roll call vote on this action to approve the partnership and direct staff and co-chairs to negotiate and draft an agreement or memorandum of understanding with Focus St. Louis consistent with the principles and responsibilities outlined in the presentation and the design elements noted by commissioners in discussion.
Okay. Reverend Starsky Wilson,
Aye.
Rich McClure.
Aye.
Oh, I'm sorry. Abstain.
Take it off the record.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you, Commissioner.
Rich McClure. No, I was waiting on conversation. Rich McClure.
Aye.
Kevin Albrand. Rasheen Aldridge. Pastor Tracy Blackman.
Aye.
T.R. Carr. Gabe Gore. Becky James Hatter. Dan Isom.
Aye.
Scott Negwer.
Aye.
Brittany Packnett. Alicia Pulliam. Pat Sly. Byron Watson.
Aye.
Rose Windmiller. All right. That's 15 yays, 2 abstentions. I mean,
No,
13
yays.
13 yays, 2 abstentions.
Thank you. I want to thank the staff team and the team at Focus and many advisors, Serena and others, who have worked tirelessly since our last meeting to work through these issues and develop an approach with guidance from United Way and what we've learned from them. So this truly, I think, is a picture of how we learn as we move forward, and what we initially thought might make sense turned out to be different and better. So thank you so much, all of you. We're going to move to the administrative part of our agenda, and we have 4 topics here, which Bethany will walk us through: an update on the community playbook, an overview of policy strategy, the Racial Equity Fund update, and the approval of the minutes.
Absolutely. So on your agenda, the first item is an update only. There's no need for action. The community playbook is something that, in conversation with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, thinking about national best practices, the staff and leadership there thought that it would be an appropriate idea and opportunity to document the information as to how specifically the design and the tactics and the launching and the closeout of the Ferguson Commission happened, so that we would have a leave behind, if you will, a legacy document, but that others would be able to leverage and to capture beyond our sunset. The intended audience is thought to be comparable organizations, local and national, seeking to address system-level policy initiatives, and the lessons learned we feel would be instructive for citizens interested in thinking about how to design and think about policy-level work. The timeline that we have laid out, we're taking actually the evaluation that we have engaged in through Truman to put the lessons learned in this playbook, in addition to a series of interviews that have happened across staff and co-chairs for a dissemination of post-January 1. It would live on the website right now. If you go to Forward Through Ferguson, it would have its own distinct place within that work that it could be downloaded. And we have had initial conversation with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation staff, who are excited to think with commission staff about the release strategy and the dissemination strategy on a national level. So I wanted to provide that update both to commissioners and to community, that part of the funding that we received, the $100,000, is going to these efforts to fulfill that commitment for Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Second, if there's no questions on that, I'm going to ask Tony White, one of the specific roles that the Ferguson Commission has played, thinking about these final 3 quarters in addition to the core intermediary design work, thinking about its external evaluation and monitoring, is also thinking of our strategy as related to policy and thinking about the 2016 legislative session. So I'm going to ask Tony, who has been a consultant procured through the state and public affairs services, to come to provide an update to all of us. For those of you that are still hanging on in the audience, the thick document that we've given you that's entitled A Guidebook to Policy, if you please pull that out, that's what we're going to be reviewing at this time.
Thank you, Bethany. I was contracted to serve as a resource to the Commission for Public Affairs, which means that my role has been to develop strategy for policy centered on the calls to action in the report and to engage elected officials and key stakeholders on matters related to the report. I should note up front that the contract prohibits me from lobbying, so I'm not able to ask staff or legislators or anybody else to introduce or sponsor or author legislation or take any specific action. So the first action I took upon coming on board was to develop for elected officials and stakeholders very specific detailed lists of all the calls to action where they were listed as an accountable body. And then met with a whole host of elected officials and mainly with their staffs. That includes everybody from the mayor of St. Louis to the St. Louis County Executive, state legislators, statewide officials such as the Attorney General and Governor, members of our congressional delegation for the region, and other civic groups and organizations. And those meetings are ongoing. In those meetings, I have worked with those officials' offices to educate them on the content of the calls to action that are in the report and to see where we can be of assistance to them. But beyond the calls to action, we felt it was important that they understand the intent and vision of the commission as well. We didn't want this just to be an exercise in people checking boxes on calls to action, and I think you've heard a lot about this tonight, that we wanted to demonstrate the Commission's vision for implementation of policy, and as it's outlined in this guidebook, in 3 key ways. 1, the difference between policy and programmatic change. 2, applying a racial equity lens to the policy changes they're looking at. And 3, aligning their policy that they may want to introduce with additional calls to action as they're listed in the report. So as you have with you, I developed this guidebook for policymakers. And as drafted, it's targeted to elected officials, but it certainly is practical for other policymakers and everyone else in general. It outlines the Commission's vision on the policy program, racial equity lens issues. It provides some user-friendly side-by-sides, I think, to help clarify the difference between, say, policy and program, what it's like to apply a racial equity lens to something and not to do so. And it provides a concrete example of just what we're talking about. It takes a case study from the report and works it throughout all of these principles to demonstrate the Commission's vision and how it would be applied to a particular call to action. And I hope to include any feedback that you all may have in a final version of this that we can distribute in the next few days. Lastly, I just wanted to provide a very brief update on some stakeholder actions that align with the calls to action in the report over the past couple of months. As has been mentioned, the St. Louis Regional Chamber and Civic Progress have publicly committed to a 25-year managed fund for racial equity. Recently, the St. Louis County Council passed legislation on uniform policing standards that align very closely with several of the calls to action from the report. At the federal level, Senator Blunt is working on legislation dealing with child hunger and trauma-informed schools. At the statewide level, Governor Nixon has recently signed an executive order promoting diversity and greater awareness of opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses. And Attorney General Koster just recently took steps to deal with predatory debt collection. In addition, the state legislature, as many of you know, the pre-filing period for legislation started last week, and some legislators have already filed bills, and there are others in process that include several of things that align with the calls to action from the report, including increasing the minimum wage statewide, reforming municipal codes to address nuisance violations, raising the cap on low-income housing tax credit projects, and then several from the Justice for All priority area, including the requirement of body cameras, use of force legislation, both Tennessee versus Garner, and establishing a use of force database statewide. Also, racial profiling and establishing a community relations training program for peace officers. Those have all been pre-filed, and we expect there to be a few more coming up in the next few weeks. So I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to provide that brief snapshot, and I don't know if there's any questions or anything I can answer now or after the meeting.
We will take just a moment to see if there are commissioner questions to build on your comments on responses to the calls of action. I would note that a number of bodies that we called are not necessarily legislative, but they're executive
Yes.
and have authority to act. And so the Post Commission at the direction of the governor, has recently adopted at least a movement toward the training standards and officer wellness and culturally sensitive training, those kinds of things that were worked out very laboriously and over a long period of time between the working group co-chaired by Commissioner Packnett and Commissioner Eisen. And so that's an addition to that list. Are there questions for Tony from any members of the commission?
Not a question. I just want to thank you for your attention to the racial equity lens in this work. I know it's often not applied to policy, and so I'm glad that we are continuing to set forth a different example.
Thanks. It was, in addition, like I said, to just getting folks to check boxes, we wanted to kind of shift their thinking, whether it's on something from the report or something else, that they're thinking these issues through.
I was just going to ask what else you needed from us to formalize the document in order to be able to post it. Because I do think particularly community groups who are having this conversation would benefit from the document as well.
The quicker the better, so I don't have anything to
Why don't
ask
we
of
just
you.
give it a day? Commissioners got it, the
Absolutely.
community has it. Staff will collect comments, or we'll send them independently to staff, and we'll get those to you and then lock it. You're ready?
Move approval of the implementing policy recommendations from Ferguson Commission's report document as previously distributed.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Any discussion? Understand, it's a living document. Somebody says something, you can do it, but we're moving forward tonight saying this is a great idea, and it is. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I too would say this is an excellent document. I'm speaking to a group on Thursday interested in education policy, and I'm going to use this as a great way to apply the racial equity lens. And I will also say, by addition to that, Felicia and I spoke to the civic engagement leadership group of a major St. Louis company a couple of days ago, and we used some of the staff work applying the racial equity lens to the Opportunity to Thrive recommendations, which they were most interested in. And light bulbs started to go off when they looked at public transit and other things, and so it is a very helpful when you do it at this level of detail. So thank you, and thanks to the staff team that worked on that particularly.
Thank you.
Okay.
Question, will this be on the website as well? So this will go on? Okay.
Okay.
Thank Tony for that. The next piece of the planning and administration is to ask Co-Chair Wilson to talk through the update of the Racial Equity Fund.
I remain seated, and it's just brief updates. I think most of this we covered in the last meeting, as has been mentioned before. One of the recommendations, one of the three core recommendations under racial equity in the report is the establishment of a 25-year managed fund for racial equity infrastructure throughout the region. We had occasion just before the last meeting to sit with a group that was convened by a local collaborative of funders who are interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those, I believe, 33 funders, representatives of funding agencies in the room, helped us to construct and to consider thought about how we build this fund together. They gave input to a presentation that was provided later that week, on that Friday of that week, just before our last meeting, to charitable officers and legislative affairs representatives from regional business council and civic progress firms, and we received positive feedback there. It has since continued in discussion from others who were outside of those circles who have interest in it. We also should note with appreciation not only the public commitments that are noted from the executive directors of Civic Progress and the CEO of the regional chamber, but also the work that is happening behind the scenes. So the regional chamber, and part of their commitment was to both commit first to the areas where they were identified accountable bodies, where they found appropriate, where they found it appropriate, but then also to learn more with other accountable bodies. And so because they were named as an accountable body here, they convened all the other accountable bodies on the Racial Equity Fund to begin to talk about construction and what the fund could look like. We've also been in conversation with the Community Foundation about what the structures could be, what oversight looks to be, and where the capacities are. Finally, I'll say, and so the core areas as we presented last time, are for support for implementation, for infrastructure. Under this area of infrastructure, we've spoken to infrastructure for diversity, equity, inclusion, training, and work and support in the region. I add to that also what was a third category last time of this kind of network capacity building for community organizing and advocacy in the region. Just last week, Commissioner James Hatter and I were a part of a discussion around this work with some of the immediate past leadership of another large national foundation, and they suggested adding to this framework innovation, supports for innovations, things that could advance the work and may actually be programmatic, but considering the considering some of the principles of catalytic philanthropy and offering this opportunity to support social ventures that may draw our programming out and lead to policy implementation. This is part of our thinking now. And so over the course of the coming couple of weeks, we'll have a couple of more intentional discussions about this with the hope to begin to kind of lay out and have a structure in place beginning of January. So that's kind of where we are. It's still moving. It's in conversations, but there's still energy and increased commitment. So we thank God for that. Any questions on it? Okay. Good deal.
Okay.
I did want to presence, actually, Commissioner Wilson, a couple of commissioners in one-on-one calls asked to clarify the distinction or the connection between the Racial Equity Fund and the potential core intermediary partnership that was presented tonight. Are there any thoughts on that preliminarily?
Yeah, I think first the Racial Equity Fund would have a larger scope for its funding purposes and intent. So these various categories of support that would be spoken to would be supported by the fund in and of itself. So it could, should, would, in our proposal at this stage, provide some support for the core intermediary work in implementation. That's critically important to all of us, but that wouldn't be its exclusive purpose or function, quite frankly. It may also, one of the structural elements when we talk to the Community Foundation, we note is that the fund works as the advisors of the fund structure it. So part of the ongoing negotiation and conversation is those who fund the fund have some input into what this design looks like. What we have proposed is also an oversight set of advisors that are weighted for people who are historically impacted by the racial segregation and implications of policy in our region, right? So those folks would also have voice in how funding gets allocated. Again, these are elements that continue to need to be negotiated, but I think the critical point that you make is it's bigger than just implementation. It's implementation, it's infrastructure, and perhaps also innovations that would advance racial equity in the region.
I want to thank Co-Chair Wilson for his leadership and his helping to conceptualize and structure this with help and input from lots of folks. And I think it responds to the notion that these are long-term challenges, and this is a long-term fund, and our region, in order to respond to these issues, needs to make long-term commitments to that. So thank you for your leadership. We have one final administrative item to approve the minutes of the last meeting, which the Commission has in front of them, and I would welcome a motion to approve or amend those minutes. Motion. So moved from Commissioner Aldridge. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Packnett. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's a hallmark of our meetings that we take the time that it takes to both do in the agenda and to hear as fully and completely as we can. And so in continuing that, even though we are over time, we want to pause here, since this is our last meeting formally as a commission, to offer any commissioners an opportunity to provide any reflections or comments if they would like to. We've already told them we don't expect to hear from every commissioner unless they all want to speak, but we would certainly offer the opportunity for any of those that would like to.
I just want to offer the reflection that actually we're on time. It's 8:39.
Thank you, Brittany.
I would like to make a quick reflection. I just happened to be looking at this date that sits up at the top of our agenda tonight, and being a former military individual who served in the United States Army, I have a dad who's 97 years old. who served in the Battle of the Bulge. And the day is a day that will live in infamy, which is World War II when Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese. And I just wanted to just reflect on the fact that that day will live in infamy. My prayer and hope is that these brothers and sisters that I've served with for the past year will also live in infamy.
Thank you. That's very kind. Any other comments? Rasheen?
Since no one wants to, no. I guess it's a reflection or a comment or just something that I'm always saying. Let me begin by saying thank you to our two co-chairs. If it wasn't for you two, I don't think the commission would have been the way that it is now, unflinching and transformative. And I didn't say that several times when I didn't thought about resigning from the commission, because I didn't thought it was starting to become very typical and status quo, that you two as co-chairs continue to push and make sure that we wasn't just a typical commission. So I thank you for that. I want to thank Miss Becky. I always get Becky and Bethany. Ms. Bethany, a huge thank you for all that you have done, all that you had to take throughout this process, even when you had to switch from a commissioner to director. I appreciate all the hard work that you have done. To the staff, a lot of you guys in the audience do not know. Sometimes I say we're figureheads, and they always say don't say that, but it was the staff that really made sure that the work is done, that the report booklet got released. It was the staff that made sure that we were prepped before we come to the meeting, and not just like, oh, what's going on, but making sure that they actually, prepped us every time, and it was the staff that also, just with the co-chairs, if it wasn't the staff, I'm not sure that this commission would be the commission that it is today. And to all my commissioners, I love y'all. I love y'all. It's been a process for all of us, and I'm going back to that moment when me and Brittany was actually in the elevator when we was getting sworn in, and we was both thinking like, what are we getting ourselves into? People are gonna think we're crazy. We're gonna be called sellouts, and then walk in a room and just being honest, a whole lot of old people and a whole lot of old white folks. I'm like, ain't nothing, But I honestly can say everyone on this commission, I consider a friend or a good ally. Everyone on this commission came into this commission not knowing what was going to happen, but made an oath and said that, what did take place in Ferguson, we wanted to find something positive out of it, no matter what our background was, if it was white, if it was black, if it was poor, if it was rich, if it was WashU, or if it was just St. Louis Community College. We all wanted to take an oath and say we want to make things better. So I know that was a challenge for a lot of us. We come from different fields, law enforcement and protester, but we stuck it out to try to find some positive for our region, and I really appreciate everyone. Like I said, I love y'all.
Well said. Thank you, Rasheen. Very touching. Any others?
I did have actual reflections besides just the
So
time.
I want to make a note, we are now over time.
Well
But
played.
Commissioner Packnett, we don't care.
Well played. I want to echo Commissioner Aldridge, and I know everyone's thanks to the co-chairs, to the incredibly tenacious and relentless staff. I often tell folks that the thing that has kept me the most hopeful throughout this process continues to be the people. All of you who keep showing up every single time, whether you can be here virtually, comment on Twitter, be here for half the meeting, the whole meeting, the start, the end. This is your report. It is what it is because you have made it so. And we are deeply indebted to you And our region will continue to be deeply indebted to you because you came here with your sleeves rolled up, ready to get into the work. And so I am thankful that our co-chair set forth not a perfect, but a highly democratic process such that those voices could come through, not just in input, but in decision-making, and so that we could start to build the kind of more equitable systems and structures that we aspire to in this region. But I would be remiss if I didn't remind us what has been said by many commissioners and staff members throughout this process, and that as much pride as we absolutely should take in the steps that we've taken to get to this point, that this is not the win. That if this were the win, then we would not have seen over 1,000 lives lost to police violence in the last year since this commission was assembled. I would not be able to name Natasha McKenna and Laquan McDonald and Ronald Johnson and Freddie Gray, Von Derek Myers, or Mansour Balbay. And so I know that we are all committed, as you are all committed, to making sure that this is not the ceiling, but that it is the floor, that this is not the end, but that it is the beginning. And as I think about what Baltimore and Chicago and Ferguson and all of these regions continue to go through, I am hopeful and optimistic that we will help continue to set a pathway forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Packnett. Very thoughtful. Any other commissioners? I know Bethany has some comments she would like to offer, and so we will give her that opportunity.
Thank you. I'd like to take the time to name the staff that are typically unnamed. If I call your name, please stand. Monique Gilliam, Nicole Hudson, Karishma Furtado, Emily Johnson, Tony White, David Dwight, Mark Zimmerman, Rudy Nickens, Kira Banks, Serena Mohammed, and we also in this group, because of the very hard work, Rosie Stafford, if you're still in the room, would you stand so we can acknowledge you in terms of the role you've played, and Aaron Buddy from United Way, if you were in the room. And a very, very special thanks as they're standing, Jerica Franks, if you would please stand. Jessica Perkins is not here, but she's an integral part, and Lorna Godwin, would you please stand? We'd like to acknowledge and thank all of you, and someone else that I'm missing, and Angela and Heidi. Thank you, and I need help. See, this is why you have good staff. And Elaine and Rebecca Bennett. And. Okay, I saw that. We just needed to have you, to acknowledge you and your work, and you may be seated. Also to Focus Leadership who are in the room. We want to acknowledge your work with us. I see you all over the place, so thank you for that. We know there is the commissioner that needs to speak, and I'm acknowledging that. The next thing I wanted to do before I close with my 5 seconds left is my husband's in the room, Laurent Javois. Would you please stand? He's real. He has endured to the end, and I just want to acknowledge my family for the commitment that it's taken for them to loan me to this work. It's been awesome. I am honored, and the work continues, and I'm ready to do it. So thank you.
So I guess we have Tracy who wishes to speak. Okay, so thank you, and Commissioner Blackman, you are on the screen, if you can hear us.
Hi, everyone. I am so sad that I could not be there in person tonight, but I don't want the day to go by without me giving my appreciation as well. First, to Rich and Starsky for your incredible leadership in this process. I'm so grateful to have had the privilege to work and to serve with you both. And also to the rest of the commissioners whom I have the utmost respect for. If I had to go to battle, I'm glad that it was with the group that was chosen for this. And to this incredible staff led by Bethany, thank you for all the hours that we don't even know about. Thank you for all the things that you did to make this a success. I am so grateful. And I know that this is a wonderful start to the battle plan. It is not over, it's just beginning. So I look forward to seeing all of you guys on the battlefield. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Blackman. Thank you for joining us and being a part of the meeting tonight. So before we close, and as only he can do it, I'm going to ask Reverend Wilson if he would adjourn our meeting as he sees fit. We did find this phone on one of the seats at the very back, and so it will be right here at Bethany's seat. If it happens to be yours, please come claim it. Reverend Wilson.
So I'll take first personal privilege and continue. I had an opportunity earlier to thank commissioners and to share my great appreciation for my co-chair. I've only shared in one other place, and I'll do it now. The most subversive thing, and I've been engaged over the course of the year. I have dealt with the family strife that comes with this kind of stuff. Have a new 3-month-old baby at home that I didn't have when we began this work. Dealt with the time away. Have been remarkably supported by a congregation of people at St. John's who gathered together and organized a protest and have never allowed me, even though I never invited them, never allowed me to come into a commission setting or a commission room without at least one of them being here, including tonight. So I thank God for their prayers. I thank God for the support of my family, particularly my wife, Dr. LaToya Smith-Wilson, and for my boys who have sacrificed over the course of this year. But for all that we've been through, engaged out in protests in the streets with Brittany Packnett and Tracy Blackman and Rasheen Aldridge, been arrested with folks over the course of this year and had people ask, why would you do that? Don't you know you co-chair in the commission? The most subversive action that I have experienced throughout the course of this year was when Rich McClure asked me in one of our weekly meetings at 7:30 in the morning, recognizing the strain that I was dealing with church, with foundation, and with home, and still trying to carry this. He asked me the question, how might I serve you? And I'm going to say that, I say that because what he engaged in is a kind of behavior that built the early church that I serve in now. The first century church was made up by people who were willing to walk away from a bit of their own privilege in order to walk side by side, walk arm in arm, walk step in step with people who were remarkably marginalized by society. And while my marginalization is more historic than present because I live with my own privilege, the fact that in this society, in this community, and in this region, he would say that to me is a subversive act, and it's the kind of acts that we will all need to engage in order to truly move forward together. It is a reconciling act that has less to do with me and more to do with him. It has to do with his capacity to see himself as a part of the solution in a real way, to be guided, to be moved, to be transformed by nothing less than his faith, and to make a sacrifice. And that's the kind of stuff that it takes. It takes that on a personal level, it takes that on a communal level, it takes that on a political level. It's going to take that kind of courage from folks. I wouldn't be Starsky Wilson if I didn't remind folks that 4 out of the 5 top offices in the state are going to be up in less than a year. There are people zigzagging across this state right now, campaigning for votes. What they're saying to you is, I'm better than the next guy. I'm better than the next woman. Until they ask, how can I serve you? They've not engaged in the kind of subversion that's required to heal our community and get us to true reconciliation, to take us down a path toward equity. And I suggest when they ask, how might I serve you? You tell them that I spent December 7th till 9 o'clock, I'm not gonna hold you that long, in a conference room with some folks, because I believe that the 2,200 people who committed part of their life to the Forward Through Ferguson report deserve to be listened to. And how might you serve me? Serve them. Tell me which of these policy recommendations you're gonna move forward if I trust you with my vote. Tell me where you stand and where you've stood as our community dealt with our burning hearts, our burning desires, and our burning buildings. And you ask them, at the end of the day, when the elections are done, I'm talking statewide, I'm talking local as well, when the elections are done, on that day, are they gonna eat burgers or are they gonna eat steak? Last October, Tracy and I gathered all day when the established, the esteemed of the legal community was gathered together for the investiture of a federal judge. We were trying to get him on the phone because we were there at the St. Anne Police Department trying to get 13 young people out of jail. And at the end of the day, when those young people got out of jail, because we finally found at least one judge who wasn't there glad-handing, shaking everybody else's hand. One judge who would make a call to work to get them out. Thankfully, this judge went to a church somewhere where he would listen to his pastor. But they finally came out, one of the members of the Millennial Activists United, we took them down and tried to get them a decent meal. We took them to a steakhouse there in North County, and one of the young guys was like, look, man, we got it. Order whatever you want to. You know, he's ordered a burger. He's like, nah, you've been in jail all night, all day. You just want a burger. He said, steak is for victory. He said, we'll eat steak later, but tonight we eat burgers. If the win for you is getting elected, we don't need you. If you eat steak because you got what you wanted and the community is still fighting for a generation, you're not the one. We eat burgers now. It's a long time before we get to eat steaks. So tonight, we're pleased to be a part of this process. But this is just ground beef. We get to the real work, we get to the real victories when we can say, when we continue to count down that these policy recommendations have been implemented, that people who have been elected, the people who are true leaders in this community, who have their hands on the levers of power, are champions for this kind of positive change. It's not done. It's not done. It's not done. Frankie Freeman is still waiting on us to get it done. James Buford is still waiting on us to get it done. Bill Danforth is still waiting on us to get it done. Tonight we eat burgers. I invite you to stand with me. It's been our practice, and I guess after 19 times, at the 19th time you can call it a tradition, to close our meeting with a time of silent reflection, centering about our place in this work and where God will have us to be. Thank you. God bless you. May God keep us all.